We all have that favorite GTA game in our lives, whether it's going back to 2001 with GTA 3, or we travel back to the 80s, which happened in 2002 with Vice City, or maybe, hey, you grew up in the 90s and playing something like San Andreas where you had that bike at the beginning was simply awesome. That 3D era, that PS2 generation of Grand Theft Auto games is simply amazing, especially when you talk about the soundtrack and things like that. And that's why we thought that, hey, we had already covered GTA 3 over 2 years ago, so now it's time to talk about arguably one of the best games in the PS2 generation, Grand Theft Auto Vice City. Is it still worth playing in 2021 and beyond? Personally, I think the answer is yes. This is going to be a badass, awesome conversation with another edition of A Cast of the Past, with a brand new episode coming at you every single Sunday, and clips and videos across the week at youtube.com/A Cast of the Past with yours truly. My name is Juan Velas. I am from Puerto Rico. Now, joining me for this it's going to be a damn good episode, guys. We got from London, Ontario, Keith Hamilton. Now, Keith, when
Hi.
you think about Vice City specifically, is there anything that you're like, man, when I think about this game, this is the first thing that comes to mind?
Owning businesses and selling cocaine out of ice cream trucks. That is the first thing that comes to mind in this game, and just my love of this. For me, this is my first and utmost pick of favorite Grand Theft Auto game. I worded that weird, but I had to roll with it.
It's a game that you love. You love the game, Keith.
But yeah, I love this game so much. This is easily my favorite of the bunch. And I was thinking while you were doing that intro, do you think that there are people out there that are like, GTA London, that's my jam. Grand Theft Auto 2, that was the peak of the franchise. Is every GTA somebody's favorite? Or
it's kind of interesting because I think
talk about those
I think
ones
a lot
anymore?
of people just assume GTA 3 is like the first GTA game, as weird as it sounds, because I think everybody saw the GTA letters in that Nintendo-like font or something like that with the black and white logo. But then this is where it really started, right? And speaking of that, Ryan McNulty from Boston, Massachusetts, it's actually a question I'm going to pull over to you. When you think about GTA, it's like, did you play or was motivated by some of those earlier ones?
The only reason I played the 2D GTAs was because it was before I could get access to GTA 3, and it was the best I could do for a little bit. And guess what? It just doesn't compare. These games were really made to be in 3D, and the 2D ones was really just the stepping stone to have the idea in place. And that's why, it did have some popularity as the 2D games, but it changed everything as soon as it went to 3D.
It's like we say sometimes for some games, they lay the foundation. You don't have fun with it because I think those earlier games, and let's be real, even the PS2 generation ones, they're ugly. But the PS2 ones brought so many things to the mix that top-down perspective really didn't bring that to us. And, just as a refresher, because it's been a little while, when you think about GTA 3, let's just put a light pause on Vice City. When you think about GTA 3 now, do you still think that's a great game despite some of its faults? For Ryan and Keith, either one of you.
Yes, I do. I think it is a very good game, but also very much a laying the groundwork style game. I compare it very much to even though it's far ahead of it in time, it's like an Assassin's Creed, right? Where Assassin's Creed 1 is totally a good game on its own, but it laid the groundwork for the next game that came after it, number 2, which was just a phenomenal experience. And GTA 3 and Vice City are very much the same thing for me. I would still recommend everybody check out 3, but Vice City's just oh brother.
It is one of those situations where Vice City and the following titles really just everything about them is better. There's nothing about GTA 3 that's inherently better in that game that wasn't improved upon in future titles, but the foundation of Grand Theft Auto is good enough that it's still a very playable and enjoyable game. It's just they've gotten better and better as time has gone on.
They really have, and same thing for me. Every time that I kept playing this game now, for the playthrough for this review, it's Vice City and GTA 3 are so similar, right? Because even graphically, it almost feels like an expansion, just visually speaking. But then as you play, you're like, oh, but you got this little thing a little bit better. You got this thing a little bit better. And overall, it's like one of the best sequels. And for context, like both of you have played this game previously. I hadn't played a single second of it, despite the fact that I love the commercials.
That's amazing.
Yeah, like zero. And I really still don't know why, because I freaking love 3. I remember every single commercial. Like I will wake up at 2 a.m. in the morning and they would have the soundtrack commercial, where you could buy the 3-disc set or something. And I played San Andreas. I'm like, I don't know why. I think it was because so many games came out around that time. I mean, look, this was in 2002. GTA 3 came out in 2001. But in this year that this game came out, we just got a couple of games, guys. I mean, we're talking about Super Mario Sunshine, Metroid Prime, Elder Scrolls Morrowind, Wind Waker, we got Spider-Man 1, MGS2 Substance, Splinter Cell 1. Those are just some of them. So I think it's just early 2000s was so powerful that maybe somebody like me just kind of skipped it out. When you travel back to 2002, what was that year like in gaming for you guys?
I mean, yeah, like you just mentioned, there's so much to play that came out in that year. And you really, it's interesting because if you talk with people from our generation, like everybody always has one of those on their top games list, whether it be Super Mario Sunshine, Morrowind, Wind Waker, but there's usually only one of them, so it's kind of like everybody just kind of picked their game, or they had access to their one game, and then that was what they played the heck out of, and for me, Vice City was that game.
Vice City was a game I spent pretty much an entire summer playing, but I didn't play it until the PC version came out because I actually didn't get a PS2 until late in the generation. So I was probably playing it in 2003, but I played the heck out of this game, not just the campaign, but then there was a whole modding scene online with this game. So you could replace the cars with things from the Fast and the Furious, because that, it was back when it was about street racing, that movie series. So you'd actually be like, oh, I want this car to be in the game. And it wouldn't make sense because it's the 80s. But I had a ton of fun. Me and my cousin just played so much Vice City, modding it. And there was even someone created a online mode for it. It was probably the worst online mode you'd ever see, because they hadn't even finished the animations of other players moving around. So they would be almost T-posing and moving around the map. And then you would just die instantly because you couldn't see them shooting you. It was very, very rough, but it was people had the vision for GTA Online even back then, and were trying to make that happen even before Rockstar had started working on it themselves.
I have a very vivid memory of playing a San Andreas online mod, and everybody took bikes to a top of a mountain. It's my story.
Wow. It's kind of interesting, that
It's going to be a good episode, guys.
Yeah. No, I do love the early 2000s online modding community. It was very janky. It was weird, but it's kind of interesting to see what GTA has evolved into. And after we review this, if you're listening to us on the podcast apps, please consider dropping that 5-star review. But in this very episode, you ain't got to go anywhere else. After we talk about Vice City, we're going to have an evolution of GTA conversation when comparing that 3D PS2 era to the HD 4 and 5. What are some of those favorite differences, things like that? We are going to talk about that. But talking about this game now, not playing it in 2002, playing it in 2021, starting it with Ryan, having loved the game back in the day, traveling back to the 80s then, it's kind of, the 80s is more relevant now than it is in 2002, right? What was your thought process with playing this game and again now for the podcast?
So yeah, we hadn't played GTA 3 since 2018, so it's been a couple of years, and I was playing the PC version last time, and this time I decided to get the PS4 download, and I don't recommend doing that because it is a terrible, terrible port. I'm playing on a PS4 Pro. Should I be having frame rate issues with Grand Theft Auto Vice City? Yes,
wow.
For real. For real. I had better
Yikes.
frame rate back in my PC in 2003, okay? This was absolutely ridiculous. But yeah, so it's a bad version. Trust me, don't get it. It's not good. Plus they cut out, you don't even get Michael Jackson's music in it or whatever.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's actually, even for this episode, like, we had to have a conversation of which version to play, because that PS4 one is based on the Android version, and aside from like the first launch version on the PS2, every other version is not identical. It's like, it's still the same game, right? But it is that, hey, which is the definitive version? But what was, despite the technical faults, how was that experience?
The experience, I think it was a bit of a mixed bag. The combat was just so horrendous, and I'm sure we'll get into that more. I forgot how bad it was. We played GTA 3. I feel like I wasn't complaining as much then, but like I said, might have been
played
just
it on the PC.
It was
That's
the PC,
why.
but I was using a controller on the PC for most of it, except when I would cheat for like sniper missions and stuff like that. It was a lot easier to use the mouse. But yeah, I don't know why, but I'm sure it's just as bad. So yeah, the combat is bad, but again, I think the story, the voice acting all holds up very well. And there's one thing that Vice City gets better than pretty much any other Grand Theft Auto game, and that's the vibe. Really, nobody hits the vibe. No other GTA game hits the vibe better than Vice City, in my opinion. And that's what carries it. It's really the fun characters, the hilarious, absurd lines of voice acting, some jokes now that I'll understand a little bit better than I did back in 2002, 2003. Yeah, it all holds up well. It's really just the gameplay part is a little rough, and some missions were a little more BS than I remembered and didn't work as properly as I remembered them working.
Yeah, so I played it. I acquired a PS2 version of the game and played it that way. I'll let you all fill in the blanks. And I was surprised how well this game held up. Like, I walked into it expecting the jank, very much remembering my Grand Theft Auto 3 experience. I knew that the gameplay was going to be a little rough around the edges, so I walked into it accepting that. And the vibe, and I think Ryan said it perfectly, the vibe was enough to guide me through that game. Like, the characters are so strong, the aesthetic they are going for with that colorful neon 80s vibe, I think they just nail it so perfectly in this game. It was enough to propel me to want to play the game. And yeah, I don't remember it being as difficult as it was, because it feels like...
Yeah, I always thought it was like... I remember thinking it was so much easier than GTA 3 back then, but I was having trouble with... there was a couple missions that really gave me trouble.
There's not a lot of wiggle room in some missions, surprisingly.
No, not at all.
It's like, if you mess up just a little bit, you got to start over.
Oh yeah, hitting those markers in like street races are pretty unforgivable. Yeah. Or the boat, the stupid boat mission. Ooh.
Oh my god, the boat mission is terrible.
It's so bad, yeah.
I never realized just how much they quote unquote take the training wheels off in that boat section of the game, because when I was initially playing it, I'm like, okay, this is going well. This is going pretty easy. And then there's a point in the game midway through it where it's like, okay, kid, the training wheels are coming off. You got 5 minutes to do a bunch of stuff and drive to the other side of the city, blow a bunch of stuff up. You don't want to screw it up. You only got 5 minutes, and then you got to do it again. And then it's just a bunch of missions that get more and more intense in that regard. And I forgot how difficult it was. Like, kind of remembering my time with GTA 3, I think I had a more difficult time with Vice City than I did with 3.
See, I definitely disagree, because at least back in the day, I remember it took me forever to beat GTA 3. I actually went and beat Vice City and eventually went back to beat GTA 3, especially that espresso to go mission in GTA 3 where you had to take all the coffee stands down across all 3 islands.
Screw that mission.
There was way more. The one thing one thing they did right in Vice City,
and without a freaking map. I mean,
in Vice City, Vice City cut down on a lot of the timed missions. There were still a few, but there was way less than GTA 3. GTA 3 loved to give you time missions, which was just horrendous.
Yeah, that's true. And at least for me, it's like, keep in mind, I'm the odd man out where I have nostalgia for GTA, none for Vice City. Like, I love the soundtrack, right? So like those things are brought up, but I was a little concerned because these games are very janky, and I think that so I love my time with it, but the combat, as Ryan mentioned, is bad. It's not decent. It's not below average. It is bad. And this game, they actually leaned a lot more into the shooting mechanics in this game as opposed to GTA 3. I think
not
GTA,
only that, but the first-person shooting mechanics, which ooh, brother,
because with GTA 3, it was a lot more it was more literally Grand Theft Auto. I feel like GTA 3 was more about the literal name of the game. Here, it's like, hey, we have Tommy Vercetti. We have this character that talks. He's very cocky, arrogant. We got this large cast of characters, and he's a very violent character. So you often have to go out and shoot, and some of the weapons have auto lock on. Thank you for those. I rarely use the other ones.
I stuck to those unless there was very specific scenarios.
Yeah.
Oh, that
unless
Colt,
you had
the
to
Colt
use them.
revolver, baby. That's the Colt 45 is where it's at.
Oh yeah, that thing carried me through that game.
Yep. You just stand there, you do your little pivots, and you just start one-shotting everybody.
It is shoot, next person, shoot, next
Shoulder
person,
press
shoot,
get a lot
next
of work
person,
out of
shoot,
this
next
game.
person, then you win. And that is the best way to play that game.
That's pretty much it. And the thing that this game gets so right is GTA Vice City, and I think that the PS2 era GTAs are like the opposite of what I look for in a game. Usually, I'm a gameplay heavy, story is secondary. Here, it's story and world is number one. Gameplay is serviceable enough so you don't punch the screen, but at no point am I thinking this is amazing. But, I mean, Ryan mentioned, Keith, you validated it. When the vibe is so freaking good, you can forgive the game of its faults, and it is so it's not good, it's amazing at what it gets right. That you're like, dude, the shooting, it sucks. It is just bad. But damn it, did I not love this game? It's just unbelievable.
Another thing about it is the gameplay, like the actual gameplay is bad, but you have so much choice, right? And I think that also helps is you don't have to do it. Some missions are a little more linear, but other ones, it's like you can take whatever vehicle you want. You can use whatever gun you want. You can go about some missions in different ways. So there is like the fact that you can kind of make some of these missions your own helps like kind of mask how bad the gameplay can be at times.
Exactly.
So when you guys say the gameplay is bad, are you specifically talking about shooting, or are you including driving in there as well? Because I have to disagree if you're including driving, because I actually really enjoyed it in that game.
Yeah,
and
I think
smooth it felt.
The driving, like, it's very arcadey, which is fine. It's not supposed to be this super realistic game. I think driving cars is fine. And even helicopters and planes, I didn't have too much trouble with. The only vehicle I really didn't like was the boat.
Yeah, the boat sucks. But
especially when you have to like fly and jump with the boat. Oh, it's so bad.
Yeah. Boatyard is the worst. It's not even required to beat the game, the boatyard, but
nope. And maybe that's why I had a better experience, because I knew that going in and avoided it like the plague.
I didn't know that going in, so I had a more raw experience.
Yeah, see,
I did have to eventually look for a guide, because after a while in the game, I'm like, I've done all the missions and I have nothing else to do. So I just drove around. It's like, oh, you got to buy the different properties and complete the missions and all that stuff. Which, look, padding. This game does have padding, and I think there's no questioning it. What's there is good and enjoyable for the most part, but when you think about Vice City and this stretch of 3D era Grand Theft Auto games, like, what do you think is the biggest takeaway, the biggest reason that you're like, look, I understand why people still talk about this game? I mean, even when we eventually switched over to the HD era, you know, we got different takes on Liberty City, but people were always like, man, it's like, you got to go back to Vice. Imagine with like HD graphics and all that. So it's like people continue to connect with this game. What do you guys think that is?
It's one of my favorite words in the English language or favorite phrases, but I think Vice City is just that perfect middle ground when it comes to the PS2 era GTA games, because you had Grand Theft Auto 3, which, like we mentioned, it was a great groundwork for it. But once you get to San Andreas, I'm one of the people that think that they were maybe a little too ambitious with San Andreas, and there was a lot of unused and unnecessary map in there just for the sake of it being bigger. So that makes Vice City this perfect middle ground where they do so much with that city, and then you add the vibe and the character that it brings to everything around it. Like, they front load some of the best aesthetics of the city on the first half, on the first island of 2, and it gets a little dumpy, ghetto-y on the second island, but you can still tell every distinct district in Vice City. They just do so much with the space that they do there that from that time, it feels like the most alive city that like Rockstar or any game really ever created, in my opinion.
So yeah, what I think Vice City gets right, and I do disagree to an extent with Keith when it comes to San Andreas. I do think overall San Andreas is a better game, but we can talk more about that later. But I think what Vice City does right is it's very focused. A game like San Andreas, it tried to cram a lot in, whereas I think Vice City just honed in on what it wanted to be, and it's very much hits exactly what it intended to. The 80s vibe, that feel, and it gets it perfect. And I think the story, even though San Andreas I think has a great story, GTA 3 story is definitely lacking, but Vice City story, you understand, it's very easy to understand, it makes a lot of sense, and it doesn't open up like 50 million threads and go in 100 different directions. It sticks very much to this deal went bad with the mafia group that Tommy Vercetti's working for.
Yeah, talk to us a little bit of like what is the story and the premise of
to
Vice?
Get into the story, we have Sonny Forelli, who is a part of this crime family, this Italian mob style family, which they talk about in GTA 3, so it's a nice little callback for people that played that game. But this is back when that family was like in their prime. Tommy Vercetti just gets out of prison, so they basically send him down to Vice City to cut out a slice for themselves there and just have him do all the dirty work. And then the Vercetti's got all this money and he's about to do this big deal, and then it goes wrong and he loses all the money, and now he has to basically work his way up in Vice City to be able to get the money back to be able to pay off his mob boss. And he just makes some friends and eventually ends up taking over the whole city. And I love how the story very much aligns with the gameplay, because there's a lot of GTA games or Rockstar games where you're the hero or something, but then you're also just like, when you're not doing the main missions, you're like killing people, and it doesn't really work with being the hero of the game.
Yeah.
You know, like Red Dead Redemption, the first game. But in Vice City, it's all about taking over the city, and you quite literally do that throughout the game. You take over a mansion, and then the businesses, while I agree it does there's some pacing issues there with that, you are literally like buying out these businesses and creating an empire in Vice City. So by the end of the game, you're collecting money from all these different locations, and it's like you really feel like you own the city.
Yeah, I remember that being a huge point of love when I first played that game back in 2002, that you were just like, had the ability to buy these businesses and really own Vice City, because in Grand Theft Auto 3 you're just kind of going from mission to mission, and yeah, you accomplish your goal, but you don't really feel like, oh, you're taking over. And that's something that Vice City just does so well. And even though the missions in like reality or the businesses are just, oh, hey, you can go do a couple of more missions, or hey, here's a different type of mission you can do. It was such a cool feature to be able to just own a chunk of the city.
Yeah, it was one of the best features.
It really was, and I think that something that this game gets so right, and Ryan, you brought up an awesome point. Even when I was playing GTA 4, San Andreas, where these characters, they have a lot of human elements, Tommy Vercetti doesn't give a damn. Like, Tommy Vercetti is power hungry. It's like, you're in many ways the bad character in this game. Like, you are this shady, power hungry person that's got different elements, but in the gameplay side of things, it makes sense, right? It's like, never am I playing this thinking what I'm doing with the driving, with the missions is the opposite of what the character would do. You're like, of course he would do that, right?
He's a killer. He's a serial killer, and you get to play that fantasy if that's a fantasy of yours.
And look, the fact of the matter is, like, I mean, this game rips off a lot of things in a good way, and sometimes to a T of like Scarface, Goodfellas, these amazing movies. I mean, even going all the way in to the final scene. I mean, like, come on, the buildings, but it makes sense, and you feel powerful doing it, right? And the story and the family element really does make sense.
Yeah, there's a big fancy word for when your gameplay in a video game doesn't match the story. It's called like ludonarrative dissonance. So it's like you play something like The Last of Us 2, where you're supposed to be like Ellie and you're like a more sympathetic character, but then you're just gunning down all these people, and it really doesn't make sense to me.
The Tomb Raider games, the remakes.
No, Uncharted to me was a big one because with Tomb Raider, Lara Croft is a lot grittier, right? But here we have like Nathan Drake, Kira Smith. It's like, dude, you're a murderer. You're a freaking murderer, right?
Yeah,
and
even
here it's like
Indiana Jones, like even Indiana Jones wasn't just like wasting, like he didn't have a body count of like 3,000 by the end of the game, the end of the story. Like Nathan Drake has like 50,000. He's got a body count of 50,000.
But isn't it funny to think about where he's like, "Hey guys, I'm Nathan Drake. I'm your buddy. Boom, 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 boom. Just massacred 11 people. Okay, next joke. Let's find this artifact."
He's out there cracking jokes. I just murdered 50 people, but ha ha ha.
I just destroyed somebody's family tree. Let's go find this Jeep.
Exactly. So obviously, like, look, GTA. We talked about this in our GTA 3 review. All of this is why GTA became controversial. I mean, Tommy Vercetti as a character is in many ways condoning the actions of what is happening, right? As opposed to other games that, well, the character wouldn't do this. It's you doing it on the side. It's like, no, here's like straight up revenge. I don't want people to live. But I do think that from a gameplay side of things, it makes the story matter because the actions and the words do really coincide. And then we got to talk about two things now, which is the world in which what you do all of this in, and the music. Going back to GTA 3, one of my biggest gripes is that, it was 3D. Some parts of the world were memorable. The soundtrack was great, but a lot of it felt empty, or, hey, this is the first GTA like 3D game. Where Vice City, it's like by placing it in a Miami type setting, having the visual tone be that 80s theme, and you have the soundtrack that matches it, I really do feel like, even though I was born in 89, so I'm technically an 80s kid in that I was born there, but I wasn't alive in the 80s, right? I didn't experience the 80s.
Answer. You're a 90s kid.
I'm a 90s kid, exactly. So, but playing this, it's like I felt like I was in this time period. I felt like I was playing Tommy Vercetti. You can change your costumes to reflect what is happening. And I do think it's like, it's an overused word, but it's like immersion, right? I felt immersed playing Vice City. What's your guys' take on the world, the actual city that you're in, and like the soundtrack that just is freaking amazing? I mean, come on, man.
Yeah, a lot of my taste for music comes from GTA games. So a lot of like 80s songs that I like is because I heard them in this game and I really enjoyed them. So that it's like Guitar Hero and Grand Theft Auto like shaped a lot of my like a lot of my likes in music. It's true. And yeah, Vice City is probably one of, if not the best soundtrack of any GTA game. And they just, 80s, I mean, there's so many memorable songs from the 80s. You really just pick a greatest hits. And this gets almost every great hit you could get. And then, the it's like when you think of the vibe and how they nailed the world, it's like, sure, they've made the worlds more immersive with more technology and everything, but for PS2 era, there's very few worlds that feel more alive than Vice City. And you always just think, when you think Vice City, you always just think that strip where the Ocean View Hotel is and all like the neon lights. And it's great that they start you out there, because that kind of captures the Miami party vibe. And I it's kind of interesting that they have the two islands, and one's kind of like I said, the party vibe, the nightlife, the glorified parts of the 80s, but then the other island's kind of more like what Florida is more like the rest of Florida is like, right? It's not exactly very pretty, and yeah, there's some rougher areas, and it's a little bit dumpy, but hey, that's some of Florida, that's America for you. So.
Yeah, and they made such a smart choice by making the party island the first island, because imagine if they started with that second one and then you had to work towards...
Well, that's what I like, because Vice City Stories, which just to touch on, they actually start you the opposite. You start on the like slummy island, and then you make your way over to the other one, which I thought was a cool way to kind of mix it up.
No, because to me that sounds extremely unappealing. But
it's like, I think in the context that like you've played Vice City,
it's I think that works. Plus, it's like you're working your way back up to the other one, and for context, Vice City Stories came out in 2006, so about 4 years after this game. And Keith, in your case, so in your case, Keith, like that world, the music, what did you think of that?
I think the music is the thing that makes the world as good as it is, because with Grand Theft Auto games, a lot of the times you don't get to pick or organically pick the soundtrack. It's whatever happens to be in the car, or that's playing in the car that you just hijack. And the thing that I love about Vice City is that there's not a bad radio station. Like for me personally, there was nothing that I went like, oh, it's on this channel, I need to switch it immediately. It's like, oh cool, V-Rock's on, I'm going to listen to some rock and roll. Okay, well now we're listening to Flash FM, and there's a little more hip hop going on. And just being able to enjoy the entire soundtrack and then it matching what you're doing. There was a lot of times when I was playing this game where you vibe is the perfect word for it. You just hit this zone, like you're chasing down some guy on a bike, and then Bark at the Moon goes on, and you're like, hell yeah, I'm gonna get this guy on this bike. And it was a great feeling, and it just works so well together, and it's just a perfect complement to this game.
I'm just gonna ask, am I the only person that if I was about to do a mission, but the chorus of a song is about to come on, I would actually park my car? I could not skip the chorus. I had to wait for that to finish. And then
every time.
Oh, now I can do this.
There were times where I would just sit and listen to like the chat station. Like if it was in the middle of a conversation that I liked, I would just sit there and listen to the VCPR. Yeah.
No, it's such a really good game, and in my case, we are going to talk about the evolution, if you will, of like the 3D to HD games, but playing Vice City, I'm actually happy that I didn't play it back in the day, because I was afraid that I would see this game and it's old, it's outdated, and it is old and it is outdated in many different respects, but in many ways it shows that's like, in a basic sense, as long as you have in an open world game, right? We're talking about that. As long as you have an open world that is memorable as far as like the architecture, structure, you have a good enough character that you give a damn about, but then you have a soundtrack to accompany it, and missions that are pretty fun. Because I think the missions in this game, it's like you are, driving motorbikes through roofs, you're using helicopters, some of the missions are better than others, but there's a lot of variety. It's like GTA 3, when I was plowing down in like a couple of days, a lot of it felt samesies, just kind of twisted. Yeah. Here it's like, man, you don't know what to expect. And for better or worse, like for a sequel just a year later, I'm like, man, this is just a great game.
I kind of agree with that, because I agree in the sense that GTA 3 was a lot of get a car, go here, kill a guy, and do it under 6 minutes. But especially in the back half of Vice City, it was go here, kill a guy in a certain amount of times, but do it on a bike this time, or do it on a dirt bike, or a helicopter,
or get the
something.
cops off you, or something.
Or get the cops off of you.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, Juan, about what, since this was your first time playing, were there any things that you were was there anything you were let down by? Was there anything that disappointed you? Did you have high expectations for something and then were let down? Like any of the businesses or something?
I think what really pissed me off, I almost rage quit in a couple of different missions, especially when you have to go into buildings as Tommy and shoot down people. The camera angle, and it's both bad camera angles and bad shooting mechanics together. Yep. And then you die in seconds.
You just hit that auto aim button and hope for the best.
Exactly. And it's one of those things where I can become easily deflated playing a game where like, dude, this ain't my skill. It's like this is objectively just a bad gameplay mechanic. And when I got that, I started dying a lot in these missions. And I'm like, dude, it's like, I have the weapons that I need, but it's just bad to play. And in those parts, I'm like, dude, that must have been bad back in the day. It's not a bad thing in 2021. It's a bad thing, period. Whereas I think the other parts of the game, even when you're driving on rooftops, if you fall or something, you got to start over. Did it piss me off? Yes, it really did. But there, I felt like it was more my fault. And those things I can forgive a little bit more. But I feel like if they tone down the gunplay by like 30 to like 40%, or at least streamline, look, I get it. They tried to do more in-building stuff because that was even one of my complaints about GTA 3. It's like, it's a big world, but you're pretty much outside all the time. Here, it's like every time they had you go in, you got to go to the police station, break somebody out. It's like, oof, whenever you got to like just actually use the guns in the game,
in tight
not for
spaces.
Just doing random shenanigans, it's not great.
Yeah, and there was definitely some mission mechanics, like even the one where you and Lance Vance have to dress up as cops, like trying to lure a police car into that garage.
Was a nightmare.
It kept getting like super glitchy, or like other cop cars would like block it so none of them could get in. And that took me so many tries because it was just like it wasn't working. And I would say back in the day, one of the the Malibu missions I enjoyed, but every single Malibu mission sucks. I will say it. Every Malibu mission is terrible, and it doesn't even make any sense. I was disappointed. Like going back, I was trying to think about like, oh, you own these businesses. Like, what would be fun missions for them? What does a bank robbery have anything to do with owning a nightclub? It makes no sense. It would have been way cooler to try to like restore the nightclub or something like that. Something, you know what I mean? Something actually related.
Yeah,
it's completely unrelated. And then like you could tell like Sunshine Autos and like the ice cream place where it was kind of very thrown together. Like,
oh yeah,
okay,
the ice cream place was super forgettable.
Yeah, like that was just like they had no idea what to do with that, and they didn't have any missions.
Like, also, screw that mission.
Really?
Yeah, it was super boring. It was so boring.
It's like it was difficult in that if you got caught, but yeah, it's just like, dude, I'm just not having fun doing this.
You know what I did?
Sit back and listen to the music.
No, because what you had to do, I would go to the stadium because there's a lot of people walking around there. You just park there until you get a 1-star level, and then I would drive around until the 1-star went away, and then I would do it again. And it was like you could only get 3 at a time, like at most. It was so monotonous.
You're talking about
you
Vice
park
City
yourself
or real life?
Around. Well, both really. You just park yourself around one of those like wanted stars around the city, and then just
Does
you
it
get
respawn?
your heat. It does after a while. Because I always had my route, like even early in the game to get money, I would just like rob the hardware store, go hit 2 of those wanted stars, and then lose the cops, and then be done with it.
Oh,
but yeah, even
I was gonna
though
go ahead.
Sorry. Okay, I was just gonna say. All right, 1, 2, 3.
Okay,
I got
come
it.
on, guys.
It's gonna be a great episode, guys.
Podcasted before.
So I was going to say, even though I mentioned earlier that it was my favorite part of the game, going like like when I played it the first time, to me, owning the businesses now very much feels, like you said, Juan, it was very much fluff. It was, okay, we have a Grand Theft Auto game and we need to check the boxes. So, okay, with this one, we sell the drugs. With this one, we rob a bank. With this one, we print money. With this one, we make a porn studio. Like all of the edgy criminal stuff that we can fill in. Let's kind of fluff the game with that near the end of it. Like going back in this playthrough, even though I still like the concept of being able to buy the businesses and they slowly accumulate money for you, and then you have to unlock a certain amount of money to get to the final part of the game. Like that concept is cool. The things you do in those missions, I was not a fan of at all.
Yeah, I mean, I think the movie studio was one of the better businesses, and like the taxi one wasn't that bad, or the printing press. But yeah, like I said, Malibu was terrible, Boatyard was terrible, and then the ice cream one was terrible. And Sunshine Autos was pretty boring too. You just collected the cars. So most of them were not that good. One thing I was going to say that I did appreciate is that money does actually matter in this game quite a bit, and way more than GTA 3. And I like died right after I finished a mission, so I didn't want to like reload my save. So I went out and I just like blew like 40K on guns. And then that really actually hampered myself for owning the businesses later.
Especially towards the end.
I had to do a legit amount of grinding, or like just doing loops of keep collecting money so that I could buy the Malibu nightclub, because I had messed up. And then I was like actually kind of devising a plan like, okay, I got to get Malibu now because I'll be collecting 10K and that'll help me easily start affording the other businesses. So it's like, if you do make those mistakes and you die a lot and you don't want to continue from your previous save, money really is going to be something that you actually have to like grind out and work for, which I think is a good thing, because a lot of times in GTA, money can be like totally meaningless.
Yeah, and I think for better or worse, it gives you a purpose, right? More so than the missions or something in between. Like a lot of times, the open world part of an open world game is just kind of like, hey, you're getting from point A to point B, but you get a little bit more meat on that bone here where, hey, you can go collect your 5K from this building or your 10K from the other one. So if we talk about Vice City in 2021, despite some of those faults, starting with Keith, like, would you recommend to somebody that has never, here's an interesting question, for somebody that loves something like GTA 5 and is like, okay, I've only played 5, I've heard great things about the PS2 ones, maybe I play Vice Cities. Like, is that something you would recommend? Would this be the definitive PS2 GTA game you think people should play?
Absolutely. No questions asked. I don't know if they would get as much out of it as somebody that is returning having played it as a kid, but especially from GTA 5, how it's become this crazy arcade campy thing. That game is like that. This is where that came from, where the over-the-top characters really started to shine and the aesthetic of it all. Like, I think that stuff is so strong that it is worth kind of like slogging your way through the gameplay just to be able to see all those characters. So yeah, I would give this a strong recommendation even today.
What about you, Ryan?
So I would say if you are someone who plays only modern games and that's what you like and that's what you enjoy, I wouldn't recommend this. It's just because it's going to be too rough around the edges for you. But if you're someone who can appreciate an older game, then this is definitely a game worth playing. Or if you're someone who's really interested in the PS2 era Grand Theft Auto lore, like the stories behind it, because you have GTA 3, you have Vice City, you have San Andreas, you have Liberty City stories and Vice City stories, and all of those connect into one big story. So if you have interest in that whole, if you have interest in all that saga, then definitely play this and play all the other ones. But otherwise, if you're just a modern gamer and you like GTA 5, I probably wouldn't go any further back than GTA 4 and the DLC campaigns for that game.
Yeah, so like in my case, I really do think that GTA 3 is cool. It's a historical game. It's a landmark game, right? It laid the foundation, as we've said. I wouldn't recommend for somebody maybe go back to GTA 3 because I think the world itself is kind of dull. I think the neon vibe is relevant now. Like right now, the aesthetic this game did in 2002, which is based on the 80s, is like go to Twitch, go to a retro YouTube channel, and a lot of them are going to have this theme. And it's because it's something that people love. It's like clamoring for that nostalgia. And in 2002, they took that risk because I don't think
the retro podcast.
I mean, yeah, literally, right? I mean, some of our overlays and stuff use some of those neon colors, but it's because it's an awesome time, right? So many of the things from the music, the movies, the video game, the evolution of games from 8 to 16-bit and all that stuff. It's just a really good time. I'm a lot in the mindset like Keith, where I played a lot of San Andreas, and I haven't played it since back in the day, right? So this eventually will cover San Andreas, and I really want to know what I think about it now. But back then, I'm like, there's a whole lot of emptiness, is what I felt back then. I mean, this is over 15 years, right? Almost 20. How long has it been? I lost count at this point. Whereas Vice City, first time playing it, I'm like, I like it. It feels like a compact, carefully crafted world, not procedurally generated like a lot of games now. So I really do think it is worth playing. And for those listening and watching, we really would love to know. It's like, what's your take on Vice City? Do you think somebody should play it? Please consider going over to our Twitter, which is A Cast of the Past, or joining our Discord at acastofthepast.com/Discord. It's just a really good time because I think GTA is, it sparks, for better or worse, a lot of conversations. Hey, thanks for checking out the video. If you liked it, please consider subscribing, and we are also available on podcast feeds. So search the name, click on the Sword and Stone, and enjoy a brand new episode every single Sunday.